Somalia is unlike anything that I've ever seen. We got sent over to Somalia on a killer capture mission. Now, I need to explain this because the movie Black Hawk Down does its best to try to describe the politics and the situation in the Horn of Africa in the early 1990s in the first couple of minutes of the movie. The text that rolls across the screen just doesn't really do it justice. Let me just very quickly explain to you, there was a drought that created a famine. That famine affected about 7 countries in Africa, but the epicenter of the famine was Somalia. If you're old enough, everyone in the world watched the news at night, quoting how many thousands of children died today of starvation in Africa. And in 1992, the United States went to Africa, specifically to Somalia, to try to provide humanitarian relief. What I'm saying is, we didn't go over there to take their oil. They don't have any. We're not there to put a puppet government in place. The only reason the U.S. Marines landed on the beaches of Somalia in December of '92 was to hand out a bag of beans and a bag of rice to families that were dying by the thousands every day. The situation in Somalia was bad, and it just went from bad to worse. Because they didn't have a government, there's no police force, there's no military. That means there was nothing stopping evil men from doing whatever they wanted. And there were a couple of warlords that were using drugs and guns. They're basically like gang leaders in America. But these warlords were fighting each other, trying to become the most powerful person in the country. Well, one of those warlords, in the spring of 1993, he realized, I can't defeat my enemy by gunfire, but here's what I can do. I can starve them into submission. So this guy by the name of Mohammed Farah Aidid, the leader of the Haber-Geber clan, made a decision to start to hit the United States supply convoys while they were driving through the country. He started to blow up some of the vehicles so that he could steal the food. And his ultimate goal was, I'm just going to starve everyone in the country into doing what I say they have to do. Well, in June of '93, I was training for another hotspot somewhere else in the world. That night, Mohammed Aidid and his clan ambushed a United Nations food distribution site, killed all of the workers, and took the food for himself. And as a result, the United Nations Security Council, the most powerful leaders on earth, they met together in an emergency session and they said, we got to do something about this mess in Somalia. And we can't let this incident stand. So the United States sent a very small, highly surgical force over to Somalia on a killer capture mission. What I'm saying is, you don't send Rangers to do humanitarian stuff. So we went over to Somalia with a list of targets of bad guys. We're going to hit some targets, we're going to take down some bad guys, we're going to capture them if alive and hand them off to the United Nations, but if not, we'll just kill them. And maybe give the people of Somalia a chance at peace. We're over there for about 3 months. We thought it would take about 3 to 6 weeks. It's 3 months in. And we have taken down some pretty important people. We've made some progress, but this is taking far longer than we expected. At this point, President Clinton is getting a lot of criticism in the news. And so the National Command Authority sent a message to my boss, who's on the ground with us in Somalia, saying, hey, you got to get this thing done and you got to get out of there. The news is starting to call Somalia another Vietnam. So we get a tip on Sunday afternoon, October 3rd, that there are 2 really high-profile bad guys in the same building at the same time. Now, for 3 months, we have not seen 2 high-value targets in one place at one time. But the problem is, this is broad daylight. And Rangers never do daylight operations. Because of their training, because of their night vision capabilities, they have a huge advantage on the battlefield at night. This is the middle of daylight. It's the very center of town that's controlled by ID. It's nothing but bad guys, and it's broad daylight. You can't make these circumstances any more dangerous. All of us knew that ahead of time. When my big boss The commanding general of JSOC, who's on the ground with us, makes the call to launch the force to go get these bad guys. And when he does that, special operators fly in on little bird helicopters. What you see in the movie Black Hawk Down is exceptionally accurate at this point. Other Rangers fly in on Black Hawks right behind them. And as they're doing that, I lead a long column of Humvees through the city streets. Now, we timed this so that I would show up with the vehicles about a half a block away from the target building. And I would arrive at about the moment that the Rangers are getting off of the helicopters and the helicopters are pulling away. We're just going to sit there with the engines running and wait for the call to drive the last half block. Everybody jumps on the vehicles. We want to get in and out of the target in 20 minutes or less. That's the plan. But of course, in war, nothing ever goes according to plan. And when the helicopters are flying in, when the Rangers are sliding down the road, one of those guys, about 19 years old, missed the road and he fell about 70 feet, and he was fully equipped and landed on the city streets head first. So when I showed up with the Humvees, my commander called me on the radio saying, "Hey Jeff, we got a seriously wounded Ranger. I need you to put him on the back of your vehicles, and I need you to drive him back to the surgeon at the base. It doesn't look very good." I'm under gunfire as soon as I arrive. And I have to fight my way up to this blocking position where Todd Blackburn, this busted up Ranger, is. And when I get to him, he is completely unconscious, bleeding from his nose and his mouth. He's got a couple of medics working on him, trying to keep him alive. And so I take him and put him on a stretcher and we place him on a Humvee behind me. Now I have a squad of about 10 Rangers that I'm in charge of, and I split those men in half and put half of my Rangers on a Humvee behind him, and the other half of my guys on the Humvee in front of him. He doesn't have any protection, so we're going to provide the guns that will get him back to the city. We're doing this all under gunfire. But I called my boss on the radio and said, "Listen, I'm going to drive him back to the base. I'll be back out here as fast as I can. I think I can get back out here before we're pulling off of the target and before everybody starts to make their way back." We drive away down a narrow alleyway. And when I say narrow alleyway, it isn't even much wider than this stage that I'm standing on. And then I turn, and when I turn the corner, those 3 Humvees going 10 or 15 miles an hour get shot by 1,000 enemy fighters all at the same time. We've got about 10 or 15 guys on those vehicles, and we are getting hit from rooftops and alleyways, from every window, every doorway, everywhere you look. There's rocket-propelled grenades coming across every side of the street. They're just lobbing hand grenades at us from the rooftop because you can't miss from that distance, and automatic gunfire from 10 feet away. I've got a kid who's riding on top of my Humvee, who's on a 50 caliber machine gun. He's holding the trigger down and spraying bullets left and right. But it's pretty obvious that he's not being very effective that way. So I told him to take his gun and spin it to the left and pick up all of the bad guys on the left side of the vehicle. The reason I said that is because sitting right behind me on the right side is another machine gunner. To this day, Dominic Pilla is the greatest machine gunner I've ever seen in my life. So I told Pilla to take his machine gun and face the right side of the Humvee. I'll take the front, a couple of guys in the back will take the rear, and right now, all we're doing is just trying to keep each other alive long enough to make it back to the base. Well, down on the right side of the road, hiding in the bushes waiting for us, is a Somali gunman. And when we get right next to him from 10 feet away, he sees Dominic Pilla at the same time that Pilla sees him. These 2 guys kill each other instantly. Pilla was shot in the forehead by a heavy weapon system. It was a massive head wound. And he was dead before his body hit the floorboard. And at that moment, everybody around me started to freak out. Because that's the moment that we all realized we are so outgunned and outnumbered, none of us are going to make it back alive. The first thought that came to my mind is, I've got to get my men under control, and I got to do it right away, and the only way I can do that is if I get myself under control. So very calmly, very deliberately, I started to direct these Rangers, and I started to give them sectors of fire just so that we can make it back to the base. Now guys, when I get back there, it is total chaos. I mean, the medics are rushing to my Humvee to pull the dead body out to the back. And the surgeon is running to try to get to Todd Blackburn and try to keep him alive. Vehicles are shot to pieces. People are running everywhere. And I leaned over the hood of this Humvee and I thought, God, I can't believe that we just survived that kind of enemy fire. We were outnumbered 100 to 1. All of us should be dead right now. And that's when my platoon leader, Lieutenant Larry Moores, walked up to me. He said, hey, Jeff, we just had a second Black Hawk helicopter get shot down. I didn't even know the first one got shot down. I was so busy fighting for my life. He said, we already put the search and rescue force in. We put the reserve ranger force in at the first crash site, but now Mike Durant's helicopters crashed and we don't have anybody left. So Jeff, I need you to get back on the Humvees, and I need you to drive out to the Durant crash site and see if anybody is alive out there. When he walked away, one of those guys who came back with me overheard the whole conversation. And he said, hey, Sergeant, if you're really going to go back out on those city streets tonight, don't leave your men sitting in the back of that Humvee in all of that blood. He said, man, that'll really mess them up in the head. So I sent all the rest of these Rangers to go get some more fuel, go get some more ammunition, get ready to go turn around and to go back out there. We've got friends that are in the city streets and they're fighting for their lives. And I pulled this one Humvee off to the side. We don't have running water. I didn't have rubber gloves. I just used buckets and my bare hands and started splashing water on the back of this vehicle, trying to get ready to go back out there. And guys, I'm going to tell you, with no hesitation, this is the most terrifying moment of my life. And I mean, by far, there isn't a close second. You see, I'm a warrior, and I know tactics. And I'm thinking through every possible scenario, and there is no scenario that comes to mind where we can get to that crash site, rescue those guys, and get back without getting some guys killed tonight. This is going to be bad. This is going to be really bad. And my first thought was for my men. But my second thought was for my wife. You see, I married my high school sweetheart a few years into my Army career. We had been trying to have a baby for a couple of years at this point, and she got pregnant right before I went off to Somalia. So when I'm in Somalia, I'm thinking to myself, I'm never going to see my wife again. She's a beautiful woman. She'll remarry. But my baby will grow up and never even know who their father is. And deep inside of me, I was thinking, don't do this, Jeff. This is crazy. This is suicide. But you need to know something about these men and women called Army Rangers. You see, these people live by a creed. It is a pledge, a blood oath that they make to one another, and they literally recite it every day. It's the first thing that they do before the sun comes up, before they work out and get the day's training started. They recite the Ranger Creed to one another, and this oath is their promise to one another. Part of that Ranger Creed says, I will never leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy. At the back of that Humvee, I started to think about those words, and I had to make a decision, Jeff. If you go back out into those city streets, it is highly likely that you and all of your men are going to die. If you don't, it is a guarantee that the guys at that crash site will. You made a promise. Are you going to stick with that promise, even if it costs you your life? And this is one of those moments where you have to decide, are you going to be a man or a woman of your word? So I'm at the back of this Humvee, and I am terrified, and I am sitting there thinking, God, make this stop, make it go away. I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. In fact, I started to pray, and I didn't even stop what I was doing. I didn't bow my head. I got stuff to do, and I got to turn around and get out there, but I'm scared. So I start to pray, God, if there's any way possible, I need you to make this pass for me. I started to think about Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. God, if there is any way possible, let this pass from me. He was saying, I don't want to do this. If you know what the Bible says next, it tells us that the sinless Son of God got up off of his knees and he walked willingly and freely into the hands of his enemy and gave his life up for me. So I'm at the back of that Humvee, I'm praying, God, I don't want to do this. I don't want to go out there. I know I'm going to die and I'm going to get a lot of men killed. And then it was like Jesus whispered those next words from the prayer in the garden right into my ears when he said, not my will, but yours be done. And I said, okay, God, if this is it, tonight's my last night on earth. Not my will, but yours be done. And I can't even describe for you what happens next, but there is a moment I am acutely aware of the tactical scenario. I realize how violent and how dangerous this is about to be, and that's the moment where something changed inside of me. I didn't think, I knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I will die in the next few moments. But you know what? I know where I'm going to spend eternity. So I've got nothing to worry about. In fact, I'm just a simple guy. So I had this moment, and it just became really simple and very clear to me. Jeff, there's really only one of two ways this can go down tonight. Maybe God does a miracle. Maybe I get to go home to Georgia to my wife and the baby that's on the way. Maybe God saves my life, but probably not. Tonight is probably my last night on earth. But I know this, and I know it beyond a shadow of a doubt. If I die tonight, before my body hits those city streets, I know my soul will go to the presence of my Father in heaven. Listen to me, y'all. I had this moment where I realized, go home to my family in Georgia, go home to my Father in heaven. It doesn't matter what happens next. My life is in God's hands, and he can do with it whatever he wants, because I cannot lose. And I cannot lose because of what Jesus did on a cross 2,000 years ago for a kid who didn't deserve it like me. That's the moment something changed inside of me. And I jumped on those Humvees and stayed on those vehicles. And I don't mean once, but back and forth all night long. I rolled in and out of those city streets. I stayed on those vehicles until 9 o'clock the next morning. In firefights, losing men all night long. The next day, I am the very last guy to make it back in on those Humvees. And I wasn't ready for what happened next. You see, I didn't even get all the way off the vehicles. Those big, tough, strong Army Rangers were wrapping their arms around me. One of them put me in a bear hug, and he wouldn't let me go. And he said, Jeff, I need to talk to you, and I need to talk to you right now about Jesus. You see, I had been trying to tell my friends about Jesus, but most of those guys were young, they were strong, they were smart. Most of those guys didn't share my faith because they had never faced a moment in life where they weren't tough enough to handle. In fact, they quite often would say to me, Jeff, you can have Jesus and all of that stuff if you want, but I don't need him because I've got where I'm at all on my own. And honestly, they did until this fight in Somalia. I didn't even get off the Humvees when one of them is grabbing me and putting me in a bear hug and said, Jeff, I need to talk to you about this Jesus that you've been telling me about, because I could tell there was something different about you. You and I, we have the same training. We've been through the same experiences, but it was obvious on those city streets. You have something that is so real that I can't deny it. And I want to know what it is. I had guys waking me up in the middle of the night saying, Sergeant, can you tell me about Jesus? Because I listened to your voice over the radio. Everyone else was totally terrified, and you sounded like you were calm. I don't even know how that's possible. But I know there must be something so real about what you believe that it shows up when when it matters most. And that was a moment that God threw a curveball in my life that I never saw coming. You see, I loved being an Army Ranger. I loved serving our country. And I just planned to do this for the rest of my life. And I'm standing on that airfield the next day after the battle was over with, and it was painfully obvious to me. Most of my buddies were not ready for eternity, and they didn't even start to think about it until they were in a firefight, which is a little bit late in the game. So I had a moment I never heard an audible voice from heaven, but this was as clear as anything in my life. I felt the Holy Spirit of God poking me in his chest, saying, Jeff, these guys are not ready. They're ready to meet the enemy. They're not ready for eternity. And I want you to get them ready. That set me on a path to become an Army chaplain. In fact, I would spend the last half of my Army career as a chaplain serving with those same Army Rangers. Listen to these numbers. I went off to Afghanistan 9 times and to Iraq 5 more times before retiring from the Army. And as an Army chaplain, I would stand among those men in the middle of a fight and say, guys, I know what you're going through. You know me and you know where I've been, so I know exactly what you're going through. And I am living proof. When Jesus Christ is the center of your world, you've got nothing to fear. Because of what Dr. J just said. If he is for me, who can be against me?